In the darkest days of the Great Depression, the most valuable thing a family could own wasn't money, it wasn't gold, it was this, a simple glass jar. How could something so small be the difference between a family starving or surviving? In this video, you'll learn the 15 forgotten gardening secrets that made them completely self-sufficient, starting with the one that made this jar worth more than a bank vault. And make sure you stick around until the end, because the 15th secret is the most crucial, and it has almost nothing to do with gardening at all. The $1 million seed jar during the Great Depression. Saving seeds was not a quaint hobby, it was a non-negotiable act of survival. Each tiny seed, carefully separated from the pulp and left to dry on a sunny windowsill, was a down payment on the future. Families would harvest the best of their crop, the plumpest tomato, the hardiest bean pod, and save its seeds to ensure the next year's garden would be even stronger. This was a family's genetic inheritance, passed down through seasons of hardship. It was an act of defiance against scarcity, a way to guarantee a garden could be planted with zero cost, year after year. Today, most of us buy new packets of seeds every spring, losing that intimate connection to the cycle of life. That old glass jar held more than just seeds. It held independence. But what if you didn't even have a seed to start with? The most ingenious gardeners could create an entire garden from the scraps you'd normally throw in the trash. The garbage garden. Before zero waste was a modern trend, it was a lifeline. A new garden didn't always start with a seed. It often began with the parts of a vegetable that you would normally throw away. The white base of a celery stalk would be placed in a shallow dish of water on the windowsill, and within a week, pale new leaves would sprout from the center. The root ends of green onions, dropped in a glass of water, would send up fresh green shoots in a matter of days. A single potato cut into pieces with at least one eye on each could be planted to yield an entire basketful by the end of the season. Imagine, you can still do this today with your own kitchen scraps. Kitchens became living laboratories of regeneration, with windowsills crowded with jars and saucers, each one a tiny, hopeful experiment. But getting free plants was easy. Keeping them alive in dead, overworked soil was nearly impossible. Unless you knew the secret to a disgusting brew they called black gold tea. Black gold tea. When you couldn't afford fertilizer from a store, you learned to brew your own. The secret recipe wasn't pretty, and it certainly did not smell good, but it worked miracles on tired, hungry soil. They called it black gold tea, and it was the lifeblood of the Depression-era garden. A burlap sack filled with aged manure or rich compost was steeped in a large barrel of rainwater like a giant tea bag. After a week or two, the water would turn a dark, rich brown. This liquid gold was then diluted and poured at the base of thirsty tomato plants. Crushed eggshells were worked into the soil to prevent blossom end rot, and used coffee grounds were sprinkled around to add a touch of nitrogen. This was the true alchemy of the era, turning waste into life and rot into riches. They had mastered their soil. But what about when the garden itself wasn't enough? They turned to a secret pantry that most of us call a weed patch and found a beautiful yellow flower that you can eat. The dandelion salad. That bright yellow flower most of us try to kill in our lawns today was once a welcome sight on a Depression-era dinner plate. Foraging wasn't a trendy hobby, it was a necessary skill that turned your entire yard into a pantry. The star of this wild harvest was the humble dandelion. Before the flowers bloomed, families would gather the tender young leaves, their bitter edge still mild and pleasant. Eaten raw in a salad with a bit of vinegar, or boiled like spinach to soften their bite, they were a welcome dose of vitamins. Plump, succulent purslane would be plucked from the cracks in the sidewalk, and the tender leaves of wild violets would be added to the bowl. This was the ultimate act of resourcefulness, a lesson in seeing abundance where others saw only weeds. They could find food in the most unexpected places. But none of it could survive without the one resource that was vanishing across the country: water. Watering with dishpans. In an era defined by the Dust Bowl, every single drop of water was a treasure. After the dinner plates were washed, the murky, soap-flecked water was not poured down a drain. Instead, it was carefully carried out to the thirsty tomato plants. Water used to boil potatoes or beans, rich with leached nutrients, was left to cool and given to the neediest parts of the garden. People used simple lye soaps that would not harm the soil, ensuring every drop could be used twice. Rain barrels were positioned under downspouts to capture anything the sky might offer, storing it for the long dry spells. This was the only way to keep a garden alive when the wells ran low. This constant battle for every drop of water meant that choosing the wrong plant was a fatal mistake. You had to plant the survivors, the stoic workhorses that formed the backbone of the unkillable garden. The unkillable garden. When your family's next meal depended on a successful harvest, you did not plant fussy, delicate vegetables. You planted the survivors, the stoic workhorses of the plant world that would grow no matter what. The undisputed king was the potato. It could grow in poor, rocky soil, required minimal water, and a single potato could yield 10 or more in return. Alongside it grew rows of pinto beans, the uncomplaining backbone of the garden, providing essential protein while enriching the very soil they grew in. And then there were the collard greens, tough and fearless, producing nutritious leaves through the blistering heat of summer and well past the first frost. These were not plants you coddled, they were partners in survival. The harvest was a victory, but it started a terrifying new countdown. They now had just a few weeks to preserve hundreds of pounds of food before it rotted or face starvation in the winter. Their only weapon? The distinct pop of a glass jar. Sunshine in a jar. The sound of a Depression-era summer was not just crickets, it was the rhythmic pop of canning jars sealing on a kitchen counter. It was the sound of capturing sunshine for the cold, dark months ahead. Kitchens would turn into steamy, fragrant workshops where every tomato, bean, and peach from the garden was processed. It was often a community affair, with neighbors gathering for canning bees, sharing the immense workload. Rows of glass jars would line every available surface, their colorful contents like gleaming jewels, the deep red of tomatoes, the vibrant green of beans, the gold of pickled squash. A full pantry was a fortress against hunger, edible wealth more valuable than any money in the bank. Each sealed jar was a promise whispered from August to February. Every jar sealed was a victory against the coming winter. But this obsession with efficiency didn't stop at the pantry door. It meant that waste was a forbidden word, forcing them to find value in the parts of a vegetable that you've been throwing away your entire life. The perfect partnership in a Depression-era kitchen. Waste was a dirty word. If a part of the plant was edible, you found a way to eat it. Nothing illustrates this better than the beet. Today, we prize the root and toss the tops, but back then, that would have been unthinkable. The earthy, deep green leaves were cooked down just like spinach or chard, providing a second meal from a single plant. The feathery tops of carrots were saved for their parsley-like flavor in soup stocks. Even tough broccoli stems were peeled to reveal a tender, sweet core that was just as good as the florets. This root-to-leaf wisdom unlocked nutrition from places we've completely forgotten. But their most profound secret wasn't how they used individual plants, but how they made 3 specific plants work together as a perfect, self-sustaining team. The skyscraper garden. An ancient wisdom was rediscovered during this time of need, a way of planting 3 different crops together in a single mound of dirt where they would help each other thrive. It was a perfect partnership, known as the 3 Sisters. First, the corn was planted, growing tall to provide a sturdy pole. Next, climbing beans were planted at its base, spiraling up the cornstalk for support while pulling nitrogen from the air to fertilize the soil. Finally, large-leafed squash was planted around the mound, its sprawling vines acting as a living mulch to keep the soil cool and moist. It was a complete meal growing in a single patch of earth with no wasted space. This brilliant synergy was a masterclass in efficiency on a single patch of dirt. But when that was the only patch of dirt you had, their genius was forced to expand in the only direction left, straight up. Plant once, eat for a decade. When all you had was a tiny patch of dirt behind the house, every fence, wall, and porch railing became a living part of the garden. This was the skyscraper garden, born from scarcity. Simple twine was strung from the ground to the porch roof, creating a harp for sweet peas and pole beans to climb. Cucumber vines were trained to snake their way up a chain-link fence, turning a stark boundary into a curtain of green. An old wooden ladder, leaning against a shed, became a multi-level home for climbing squash. This approach did not just save precious ground space, it also improved air circulation and made harvesting easier. This same spirit of ingenuity, of getting more from less, also led them to discover a way to build incredibly rich garden soil without the back-breaking work of ever lifting a shovel. The no-work garden bed plowing and turning heavy soil took time and energy that people simply did not have. So they discovered a secret. Instead of fighting the earth, they learned to build rich, fertile soil from the top up. A new garden would begin with a layer of old newspapers or cardboard laid directly over grass or weeds, smothering them. On top of this, they would pile alternating layers of organic matter, like building a lasagna. There were brown layers of dried leaves and straw, and green layers of kitchen scraps and grass clippings. Over the months, this pile would slowly decompose, with earthworms doing all the work. By the next planting season, the layers would have transformed into a bed of deep, dark, nutrient-rich soil. This patient method created the perfect foundation for a healthy garden. But healthy plants were an open invitation to an invading army of pests, and with no money for pesticides, they had to become kitchen chemists, fighting back with an arsenal you probably already own. The Soap and Pepper Brigade. You could not buy pesticides from a store, so you had to outsmart the bugs with whatever you had in the kitchen. A simple bar of soap and a shaker of pepper became a gardener's arsenal. When aphids descended on the tender new growth of a bean plant, the solution was a simple spray. A few shavings of lye soap dissolved in a bucket of water was all it took to suffocate the tiny pests. To protect cabbage and broccoli from hungry rabbits, a light dusting of cayenne pepper was sprinkled over the leaves, creating an invisible fiery barrier. They learned that the strong scent of marigolds planted next to tomatoes would repel hornworms, while garlic cloves tucked between rows could deter other pests. This battle of wits protected a family's harvest. But they knew that a single garden could fail, and the only true security was found not in their own backyard, but in their neighbors, by creating massive thrift gardens where everyone pitched in. Every scrap counts. When one family had a surplus of seeds and another had a patch of sunlit, empty land, they did not see each other as competitors. They saw each other as partners in survival. Across the country, vacant lots and schoolyards were transformed into sprawling, collaborative gardens. Families pooled what little they had. One person might bring potato eyes, another, a rusty hoe, and many more would bring the sheer manpower needed to turn the soil. It was a patchwork of shared risk and shared reward. The harvest was not hoarded by a single owner, but divided among all who had contributed. These plots were hubs of social connection, where burdens were lightened. This powerful sense of community was an investment in the present. But the wisest gardeners also made investments for the distant future, planting things that required immense patience but would pay dividends for decades to come. The barter network. Some things were planted not for that year's harvest, but with a quiet faith in the years to come. These were the living investments, the perennial plants that, once established, would feed a family for decades. The most common of these was the asparagus bed. It was a true test of patience, requiring 3 full years in the ground before a proper harvest could begin. But those who waited were rewarded with tender spears that would emerge each spring for 20 years or more. In a forgotten corner, you would find the rhubarb patch, tough and resilient, providing the key ingredient for countless pies and jams, asking for nothing but to be left alone. In a world of uncertainty, these plants were a rare source of permanence. Planting an asparagus bed was an act of profound optimism. But beyond the security of an enduring harvest, the garden offered something even more vital than food for the body. It provided nourishment for the soul. The hope patch. Beyond the food and the savings, the small patch of dirt out back offered something else, something money could not buy in those desperate times. It offered hope. The simple, rhythmic work of pulling weeds, watering soil, and watching for the first green shoots was a powerful antidote to despair. It was a small corner of the universe where hard work still paid off, where your own 2 hands could coax life from the bare earth. To plant a seed was to believe in tomorrow. To watch it grow was to see resilience in action. The vibrant red of a ripe tomato brought a splash of beauty into a life that was often gray and grim. So, of all the secrets, the seed saving, the garbage gardens, the most powerful one, the one that had nothing to do with gardening, was hope. That is the one timeless secret you can plant for yourself today. These weren't just gardening tips. They were a blueprint for resilience. A lesson as vital today as it was nearly a century ago. If you believe this forgotten wisdom is worth remembering, subscribe for more stories just like this. Let us know in the comments, which of these secrets are you going to try in your own garden? We look forward to reading your stories.